Dr. Candice Creasman. I'm a licensed counselor for those who are new to these now weekly meditation sessions and chats that we've been having. So to start with, if folks could, one, just let me know that you can see and hear me okay. And two, if you want to let me know where you're from. And maybe three, if you want to name a particular barrier to meditation that you're interested in us talking about today. Since the topic today is barriers to mindfulness, I'm sure most of us, myself certainly included, have encountered some barriers, and we might have specific ones that we want to work through or talk through. So feel free to drop that in the comments as we get rolling. All right, we got Yvonne who set a timer to be here. All right, high five. Catherine from England. Jamila from Azerbaijan. All right, Yvonne, Mendocino, California. Awesome. Okay, and she's noticing that not prioritizing mindfulness, letting day-to-day life get in the way is a primary barrier. And I imagine many of us can connect with that. Just sort of finding time in the day, making time in the day for practice. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and hopefully in a way that will maybe soften some of the edges that we might feel towards ourselves when we struggle to make time. Nikki's joining from Vancouver. Welcome. Belinda's noting that mindfulness is especially difficult at the end of the day. So that's going to be a big part of what we talk about in terms of addressing some of these barriers, is being aware of when we choose to add mindfulness to our day. So being responsive to other aspects of our lives in that way. And Nikki's reflecting, can't let go and find it challenging to cope. Yeah, I think I might kind of build around that to say that there's a lot of stuff that can show up in our mindfulness practice that's really unpleasant, really uncomfortable, and that is a natural deterrent. You know, as humans and just sentient beings in general, we struggle with discomfort, so that can certainly be a barrier. All right, Catherine's noticing lack of motivation and addiction to thinking. I think that is a great way to frame that particular barrier when our minds are just so used to being active that the mindfulness practices that sort of lower the priority of mental activity can be really challenging. Okay, so for those who are just joining, we're going to jump into our chat and then a meditation here. So just a reminder, I'm Dr. Candice Creasman. I'm a licensed counselor, and today we're going to be talking about barriers to mindfulness. And so a couple things to orient us to our work today. First, we'll just sort of talk through some barriers to see kind of what resonates, and thank you all for already sharing. We're going to hit on a lot of the pieces that you all have mentioned so far. We're going to do a mindfulness practice that'll probably be about 15 or so minutes. And then I'm going to leave some time at the end for us to debrief a little bit. So for folks who might be comfortable sharing what showed up for you or what worked or what didn't work, that I think is a really important part of developing mindfulness practice, is kind of having a topic, sitting with that topic in meditation, and then having a little room to process afterward. I find that really kind of helps me, at least, kind of sink in to some of these ideas and topics. All right, so barriers to mindfulness. There are a lot of different ways that we can talk about this. I'm going to take kind of two angles. One that is a little outside of my pay grade, so I'm just going to name that, and one that is very within my scope. So the first is if we think about barriers to mindfulness from the Buddhist perspective. And there are obviously multiple kind of perspectives within Buddhism. When we think about what's called the Five Hindrances, this is a common thread with some variations throughout different types of Buddhist practice. So the Five Hindrances are these 5 potential obstacles either to engaging in a mindfulness practice or in the Buddhist path in general, or hindrances, things that could get in the way of our mindfulness practice being fruitful for us. So, if we name the five hindrances specifically from the Buddhist perspective, the first is sensory desire. So, anything that would sort of engage our senses, sight, sound, I mean, we know what our senses are, right? Sight, sound, taste, textures. So, the allure of your phone screen, I mean, I get it. All of the different things that we could be eating, the things that we could be watching on TV, all of the different sort of sensory input that we receive, that most of which is sort of built to keep us engaged, that can certainly be a big distraction. So one of the hindrances that we often have to work with is really sort of getting into our frontal lobes, where we have all this sort of planning and choice and kind of higher level thinking, such that we make choices around not just what is sensory, what is pleasurable to our senses, but what is sort of aligned with our values and connected with the sorts of skills we want to build, such as mindfulness. So we really have to be intentional about choosing mindfulness over continuing to stay engaged with sensory pleasures or sensory discomfort, for that matter, right? Like, I mean, even unpleasant things can be really distracting. So one thing to note here is, as we name the hindrances, I think these were really kind of written with the assumption that we need to build some compassion for ourselves around these hindrances. So these aren't, they're not called the five excuses, right? Like, they're called the five hindrances. These are five things that can legitimately get in the way of our practice. So the work here is not to find something else to blame ourselves for, to criticize ourselves for not being disciplined enough or whatever enough, but to say that, yeah, these things can really get in the way, so we have to be very intentional about how we address them. So the first is sensory desire. The second is ill will. So this includes feelings of hostility, resentment, hatred. So this we might conceptualize more as something that, if we are fostering those states of mind, it's going to be harder for us to feel the benefit of our mindfulness practice, and we might experience that to what we might consider to be a lesser degree. So we probably aren't all walking around stewing in hate, hopefully, because that's an awful place and way to live. But we might be walking around judging people a lot. We might be walking around judging ourselves a lot. So if we are, really cultivating these sort of states of ill will, then it's going to make it harder for us to settle into our mindfulness practice, to really get at equanimity, which I find to be one of the primary reasons for going to the practice. Sloth and torpor are the next. So this is when we engage in mindfulness practice kind of like, meh, I'm not really feeling it. It's not really, meh, what's the big deal? So when we bring that sort of attitude to our mindfulness practice, then we have to then overcome that mind state to really feel the benefit. The next is restlessness or worry. So I think probably all of us have experienced, to one degree or another, this sort of erasing thoughts, and some folks have already mentioned, that, you just constantly churning on what you have to do next, all the things you haven't done yet today, all the things that could go wrong. And that's a very painful mind state, certainly. It's a difficult one to turn off a lot of times. And if we're having to put a lot of effort into that, then again, we're probably not gaining access to some of these deeper levels of mindfulness and the benefits that might await there. But again, the work is not to blame ourselves. It's to say, okay, if I want to really deepen my mindfulness practice and I notice I have a lot of anxiety, then it's really going to serve me well if I also address my anxiety, my worry, my restlessness. And then the last one is doubt. I run into this a lot with two places. So one, I see it a lot with folks who are new to meditation, which is natural, right? Here's this completely different activity that is so contrary to what at least folks here in North America and American culture that I'm used to, it's so against sort of what we're trained to do, which is to be busy. So this idea of being still and quiet. Of course, we have a lot of doubt about the potential benefit of that. So doubt can also take shape when we sort of hit like a dark period in our mindfulness. If we come out of our mindfulness having been to dark, painful places and just feel like, well, why do I keep going there? You know, that's really painful. So then it can be hard to stay with our practice. Kitty's mentioning that it cut out, asking to repeat number 4. Number 4 is restlessness or worry. Is everybody else still able to hear me okay? I'll just throw that out there, and then as the comments trickle in, I'll adjust. So if those are the hindrances according to Buddhism, which is the part that's outside of my pay grade, what I also connect with and feel is very important to acknowledge from a daily living perspective are what I call real world hindrances. Because to my knowledge, Buddha was not a mother who also had a full-time job, who wanted to also take care of her mental health and physical health. And that's just like one set of identities that it can be very difficult to establish a mindfulness practice within, right? So there's a lot that's missing from the story when it comes to thinking about hindrances. And also when we kind of put the Buddhist hindrances in a modern day context, there are new challenges, you know. So to acknowledge that there are aspects of our lives that require our attention and that may preclude us from taking hours on a cushion every day is not the same as saying that mindfulness is not for us, that a meditative, contemplative path, wisdom path is not going to help us. I think instead what we can acknowledge is that we may have to be more flexible in what we consider to be part of our mindfulness work. So in this way, when we run into real world hindrances, like there's a child vomiting, and even though on my calendar it says it's time for mindfulness, I have to handle the child vomiting. So when these sorts of real world in the moment things arise, then we use real life as our practice. While we may sort of kind of idealize the sitting on the couch or sitting on the cushion quietly with our eyes closed as being like the best way to practice, really any space that we are bringing mindfulness principles to, non-judgment, concentration, compassionate awareness, I can bring that to the vomiting child. And in that way, not only am I hopefully making this child's experience a little better, I'm also deepening my work and my practice. So we can make anything our mindfulness work. All right, so now that I've talked you all to death about hindrances, hopefully you're all connecting a little bit more with sort of some of the things that have gotten in the way. So our work today is going to be in our meditation practice to really take a Vipassana kind of approach or insight meditation approach paired with some compassion. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into a standard meditation and then check out some of the things that generally get in the way of our meditation practice. What we are then going to do is also see if we can show up to these hindrances as if they're maybe kind of like irritating relatives that we want to be nice to, but that we have some judgments about. So we're going to try to contact some compassion, some loving kindness, but we're not going to put a whole lot of pressure on ourselves to just completely embrace our hindrances wholeheartedly. But we are going to let them in a little bit, okay? So to begin, I want you to find a comfortable position that allows you to be relaxed but alert. Close your eyes if that's comfortable, or if you would prefer, you can always keep your eyes open and just find a place on the floor or wall in front of you to gently rest your gaze. And start by bringing some nice, deep, fresh breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. And then allow your breath to flow in through the nose and out through the nose. Finding that connection between the breath and the present moment. As distractions arise, simply acknowledge them and then come back to focusing on your breath. You may find it helpful to choose a single point of breath, tip of the nose, back of the throat, chest or belly, or somewhere else that feels more conducive to awareness of the breath. Now allow any barriers that you typically encounter to arise in your mind. You might simply pose this question to yourself: what's in the way of my practice? What's in the way of my practice? And you might imagine that you ask yourself this question with the same sort of curiosity and empathy that you might ask a child what happened if they scraped their knee. So see if you can contact some tenderness as you engage in this inquiry. You might also ask yourself, what are the mental barriers? What are the environmental barriers? Or even what are the physical barriers? So issues such as pain or discomfort in the body. As we encounter the environmental barriers, we might also notice feelings of resentment, irritation, frustration. So if those feelings arise, especially if we have judgments that the barriers to